and that's sort of where we are at the moment. Just sort of trying to give. So we have people coming to us from all over the country, sort of going, I'd ordered my bees, I'd ordered my hive, I got everything going, and then everything shut down around me, and it's like, what do I do?
Yeah, but surely the bees must basically look after themselves, do they not, for most of the part?
Yes and no. There's two parts of beekeeping. One would very much agree that sort of, yeah, probably they're far best left alone. The dangers you get if you're keeping bees in urban areas are colonies will probably 2/3 of colonies will try and swarm in a year, and that can be managed, but that's a real nuisance and can scare the living bejesus out of the public. Because a swarm can be 20,000-30,000 bees, and you know what it's like when you get one wasp in an office or a room.
Oh yeah,
you multiply that by sort of tens of thousands, and you can imagine kind of how the public kind of tend to have a little bit of a meltdown at that moment in time. You also, I mean, bees do sting. It does happen. You obviously try and minimize the nuisance from it. But unmanaged beehives aren't always a good idea. There's also a risk that there's quite a lot of pest and disease in the UK, as there is internationally. And unmanaged colonies can be a reservoir of that. Feral colonies, unfortunately, don't live that long, mostly in the UK anymore, largely due to a sort of pest called varroa, which we have to.
So who's showing an interest in beekeeping? Is it people in urban areas or countryside or?
Interesting. I mean, our patch is sort of pretty much sort of from Newcastle up towards Morpeth, where Annick beekeepers take on, down through Gateshead, down to Sunderland, because there's no association in Sunderland, out up the Tyne Valley. So we've got a fair mix of urban and rural. I think probably what we did see about 10 years ago was when there was a big upswing in allotment beekeeping. It was a big upswing in allotment, people wanting allotments. We saw a parallel move in beekeeping. And funnily enough, the same sort of thing seems to be happening now. Hello, hi there. How you doing? Just got some new people joining us now.
I'll let you go on with Ian. I'll just mute my mic and I'll.
Hello, Stephen and Evie. Nice to see you. Hope you can see and hear me.
Yes, hi.
Right.
Yes.
We're going to leave mics open, and when we're doing the presentation, if you just mute yourself. But if you've got any questions, very happy to ask. And we've got 10 minutes or so before we start. So if you've got any opening questions, please kick off. We decided to do this session because beekeeping, and we've been trying to fill the gap of not being able to meet face to face since sort of March time, and we know that sort of in the northeast area, we as a beekeeping association tried to keep going. A lot of beekeeping associations basically shut up shop for a while. And a lot of courses the courses tend to run early part of the year. A lot of the courses, people got through a week or so last March time, and then all the courses shut down. And that left quite a few people in limbo. I think by this stage, the courses that I know of in our area are certainly moving on to doing things electronically now, and by Zoom. Obviously that misses a big chunk of the practical beekeeping, but it will be some provision. So we're just trying to fill a gap really, and if we can be of help to people who are just about to start up. Have you got anywhere along the road yet, or are you just sort of thinking about it?
Thinking about it. Have done for probably this year. We've been thinking about it. We live out in the country. Yeah. We've got chickens and rabbits and quite a bit of ground, and just thought really bees would be a good ad, really.
Yeah, if you've got the space and you've kind of got livestock already, then as an extension of something like that, it can work very nicely. It is a bit of a skill. It takes but if you've managed other animals, you'll know that it's about their welfare. It's about their kind of looking after them, and that at certain times of year takes a bit more time than at others. It's a lovely hobby. it can become a bit of an obsession, so watch out for that. It can, the numbers of hives that you've got can gradually, everyone starts off sort of thinking, oh, we'll just have one hive in the bottom of the garden, and then they look back a couple of years later when they've got 10 or more and kind of go, yeah, something didn't quite go according to plan there. But that's something that you can manage as time goes by. It is a really nice thing to do. I started a bit over 10 years ago myself, and I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, it's become sort of, it's become kind of, more than just a hobby. It's kind of what I do semi-professionally now. So I would encourage you to give it a go. What we do find, and one of the reasons that joining a beekeeping association and joining a beekeeping association hooks you up with, we'll talk about all this a bit later on. Joining a beekeeping association. Hello, Bob. I'm not sure if you can hear me, and we're leaving people unmuted at the moment, so feel free to chip in. Hello there.
Hi.
Lovely background. I presume that's
well,
not
it
real.
is a photograph that I took, but it's actually in a place called Kanazawa in Japan.
Okay, yeah, lovely. I went there to Japan a few years ago. We really enjoyed it there. So what joining a beekeeping association does for you is, beekeeping takes some time to get to, like any skill, to get a bit proficient at. Joining an association should hopefully get you in touch with a network of other people who've been doing it. Some of them won't be doing it very long, some of them will be doing it for ages. And it's somebody when when you hit a sticky situation, and you will hit those every so often, that you can kind of phone a friend and kind of go, just kind of wondering what on earth I do here. It also gives you public liability insurance. They do a magazine which comes out, which is that one, which I write for as well. It hooks you up with a bunch of people who can help you, because it does take a bit of time.
I mean, you might mention it later, but you just mentioned the public liability insurance. I mean, does that mean, could you be done if somebody got stung by your bees or something?
There's, to the best of my knowledge, there's never been a case in the UK. I sometimes correspond with a guy who is a barrister, and he's written several books on animals and kind of the legal liabilities involved in it. I don't know of a recent case of that, but it certainly is a theoretical possibility. And because the worst thing that can happen is that somebody can go into anaphylactic shock from a bee sting, and that can be fatal. It is something that in your early stages of beekeeping, you may just want to, everyone will get stung. It's an inevitability. You minimize how much it happens, but the first time you get stung, you ideally want to be with somebody else. You don't know what your reaction is going to be until you do get stung. So having public liability insurance through the BBKA isn't a bad idea, because it gives you just that. It's like whatever job you do, whatever thing you do, you tend to have employers' liability insurance, things like that. It covers you for, I think it's £10 million worth of damages, and it covers your products as well. So if you sell honey and things like that, it gives you coverage on the products you sell, and that's all included in the money. That the way it works is the BBKA is a national association. Each area has local associations. The local associations are affiliated to the national one. So the local association you'll pay membership to. They will pay some money onto the BBKA, and you are part of both organisations, is how that works. But as you say, well, I'll explain a little bit about it as we go. It's a worthwhile, for the money it costs. I mean, membership of the local association probably costs you sort of £25–30 a year, something along those lines. It's a good investment of a fairly small amount of money. Hello to people who are just joining us, and we've got a few minutes before we start. Mics are unmuted, so please chip in with any questions. When we're doing the presentation, you might want to mute your mic, especially if like in our house there's a large gang of kids running around who who may kind of come screaming into the room as they tend to.
Ian,
Um,
it's Jasper again at the BBC.
Hello there.
Could you give me permission to record?
Yes, for
From your
sure.
end?
Just to people who are joining us at the moment, the BBC Look North programme in Newcastle has expressed an interest. They may use a couple of short clips from the presentation today. So if anyone has a consent issue with that, please let me know. Otherwise, they won't be using a significant amount. They may just be doing a short item on us for tomorrow's news.
If I knew that, I would have shaved.
Yeah, I might put dark glasses and a mask on, but there you go. Hello to everyone who's joining us today. So I'll take that as consent unless anyone sort of says otherwise. So thank you, Jasper. Yes.
Thanks, Ian.
You're welcome. So we'll start in about 5 minutes or so. As I say, your mics are unmuted. If you've got any questions, please do ask. We're doing this session as just a taster. It's a great time of year to start thinking about beekeeping if you want to start up this year. We often get a lot of people who come and join us and come asking about beekeeping in sort of May, June time, which seems perfectly logical. If you want to start at that time of year and you've suddenly got the idea, there's then quite a lot of challenges in your way before you can actually kick off. And the challenges are that often getting hold of equipment is tricky then, because a lot of the suppliers, you certainly won't get any sale prices around that time of year. You'll be paying full price. Their lead times on stock often get quite slow. And you've got a lot to learn in a short period of time. So the earlier you can kind of kick off, the better it all goes. Just gonna push the door behind me. So this is a great time, and thank you very much for coming along. Hopefully there'll be around 20 of us today, if people sort of all come along. And what we're going to do is we're going to go through sort of two main sections. We're going to go through a section that looks more at the bees and a little bit of the hives, and then we're going to go through a second section which is going to look at the beekeeping and the ways that you can kind of get yourselves as ready as you can be for to start off in beekeeping. It's, as I was saying a little while ago, it's a really lovely hobby. It does have some challenges. It does have a slightly eclectic bunch of people who do it. People who are willing to stick their heads regularly into a box of sort of 50,000 stinging insects do tend to be an interesting group, especially when you meet them en masse. They come from a very wide range. There used to be, and there still is possibly a little bit of an image that beekeepers are sort of slightly elderly, retired gentlemen, sort of, it's not really the case anymore. It really has, a lot of children are starting beekeeping, a lot of, it's become much more sort of gender neutral. It's everybody kind of, and there is no real block of anything to do it. You can do it at any age. Urban beekeeping, you need to watch out for a couple more things that you really don't want to upset your neighbours and things like that. But it is possible. The more space, outside space you've got is possible. The main thing is that you gain confidence and the skills you need to be able to do what you need to do regularly. The first couple of years will always be a learning curve, and there will always be kind of quite a lot to do. And I'm sort of 10 plus years through now. I've done a fair amount of beekeeping exams. I'm sort of halfway through doing the NDBKA's sort of course, which I'll talk about later. They do multiple sort of training courses. Every time I have a conversation with more experienced beekeepers, and sometimes even novice beekeepers, I will learn something new about what I'm doing, and it will make me think, oh, okay, I've been doing it that way for ages. Why am I doing it that way? Is what they're saying to me a much better alternative? So it's lifelong learning in beekeeping. You really never do quite sort of stop going through it. So, and that's what's quite good. Sorry about the beeping. One of the people in our association, my wife, is very kindly doing the admin and letting people into the meeting today. So that makes my life easier. As I say, we've been trying to do virtual sessions now, sort of since March, which come with some challenges. At first, we were using Facebook Live, which was a bit of a clunky medium to do it on. It worked, and we were sort of starting to, but we moved on to Zoom, and as that became, obviously, it was a much more stable platform to use. But it's been tough over the last 12 months with people wanting to learn beekeeping. Beekeeping Association being shut down, training courses like the training course in Northumberland, the main training course, it ran the first 2 weeks and then had to close its doors. And those people who were on that course are still waiting. They're hopefully going to reconvene in March this year. But we did get several kind of refugees is maybe too strong a word, but sort of waifs and strays who were partway through that course. They had their hive ordered, their bees ordered. And so everything was set up for them to start early summer, and then suddenly the course that they carefully planned just wasn't there anymore. So their plans were a bit thrown away. I hope with some of those people we managed to do what we said we'd try and do, which is help them forward, because you do need that support network. The better support network you can put around you, absolutely the better you'll be, because there is no point in a year, however much experience you've got, when you will go into a hive of bees and you will look at it, and it's like learning to read again. You're learning to read what that hive's telling you. All the little signs and all the little things in it that it's trying to tell you are clues, so you become a little bit of a detective. But there will always be a couple of times in a year with one colony or another when you will sit there and go, I have absolutely no idea what's going on here. And that's when you need to sort of start talking to other people, and you need to kind of just think through the options. And that's why good initial training will start you with the basics, and then you've got the ability to think issues through. Right, so we'll kick off about now. Actually, we've got about we've got a sort of decent number with us. I'm sure a few more people will come in as we get around to 10 o'clock. So just a few bits of introduction, by the way. So I'm just seeing a couple of other people come in, so I'm just gonna. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's Ian Campbell, and I'm a beekeeper in the Newcastle area. And I'm the chair of Newcastle and District Beekeepers, and have been for about 5 years now. So I started beekeeping a bit over 10 years ago, and I was then roughly where I guess the majority of you are today, in that you may have very little or no experience at all. So we're going to start right from first principles, because that's where everyone starts, and everyone has to learn. If a little bit of the stuff you already know, bear with me, some people won't. I think the sort of things to sort of kick off with initially are the three principal things that kind of most beekeepers will suggest when you're starting beekeeping. The first is there are local beekeeping associations all around the UK. The British Beekeepers Association covers England and Northern Ireland. There are separate beekeeping associations in Scotland and Wales. Within those national associations, there are local associations. The BBKA being the English one. If you go on their website, there's a finder for your local association. It is really worth joining a local association. It will join you to the national BBKA. That gives you public liability insurance, good resources, good education program. And the local association will hopefully give you a network of people who will be able to help you and support you through your early years of beekeeping. Part of the reason we suggest this is what we find is a lot of people want to start beekeeping, but in the first 3 years of beekeeping, we will probably lose up to 50% of people who start because something went wrong in the process, something didn't quite work out. It was either a bit more work than they anticipated, or it didn't quite go right, and we'll lose a few too many people. We try and redress that by ensuring that we support everybody we can, and that we kind of go through that process. So join the association. If you can find a local beekeeping course near to you, go on a local beekeeping course. It will be invaluable to you. It will set you up with the foundations that will give you what you need to progress. It's a really strong first step. The sort of third thing is buy yourself a good reference book. This one's probably the one that's most popular these days. It's the Haynes Beekeeping Manual. There are a number of others. There are unlimited numbers of beekeeping books. I think I've sent you, most of you, our little getting started guide. That may be of some help. Obviously, it's a bit tweaked towards the northeast. So if you're not in the northeast, that may kind of not quite work for you. This book is a good classic, which is Ted Hooper's Guide to the Bees and Honey. It's a little bit of an older style book now in the way it's laid out. It's a brilliant reference book. Have a little bit of an older style. It's one to have in your library, but the Haynes one is much more visual. And there are a couple of others which I quite like for beginners. One is this one by a guy called Clive DeBrain, called Practical Beekeeping. And finally, one I haven't used a huge amount, but I know other people do, which is Beekeeping for Dummies. So just to recap on those first key points, if you possibly can, as you're kicking off, join the association, go on a beginner's course, and get yourself a good book. That's a really good way of starting out. So just to repeat, the BBC Look North have shown a little bit of interest in maybe doing a short item for their news tomorrow. So they're going to use a couple of clips from this recording today. If anybody doesn't want to be seen or known, just please let me know. Otherwise, that they're just going to use a couple of short clips. We've got the chat function at the bottom of the screen. If you've got any questions, type it in on chat, and I'll try and answer them as soon as I can. I've left all the mics unmuted, so mute yourself when we're doing the presentation. But if you've got a question, just unmute yourself and shout out when you find a moment. That's good. Well, going to do this in sort of 2 and a bit sections. So the first section is going to be largely about bees, a short video, and then the second section is going to be more about beekeeping and how to kick off. So without delaying any more, let's go into the first thing, and I'm just going to share my screen with you. Okay, so hopefully you can all see that screen, and just let me pull it full screen. It says, yeah, it works. Okay, so very first principles. Let's work out what we're looking at. Top left is a honeybee. There's about 2,000 types of bee plus in the world. There's about 6 or 7 types of honeybee, species of honeybee, and lots of subspecies. But we're looking at this top left picture, and a lot of people will look at that and go, isn't that a wasp? Because the shape and size of a honeybee is much more wasp-like. And when we take observation hives out to shows and things like that, that's the most common reaction we get. Why have you got a box full of wasps? What people are expecting to see is the top right picture is a box full of bumblebees. Now, bumblebees live in tiny little colonies of about 200 bees. There's an awful lot of solitary bees, as what types of solitary bee. In the UK, we've got about 250 species of bee, 1 type of honeybee, about 25 types of bumblebee, and about a couple of 100 varieties of solitary bee. Haven't shown many of the solitary bees. There's just such a wide variety. But a lot of people are expecting to see bumblebees. That's not what we're talking about here. Bumblebees live in a little nest about the size of a grapefruit, small football, very rough and ready nests. They produce barely any excess honey, and they just they really only survive for 1 season, and the queen's the only one in the colony that survives the winter. Honeybees, very different. Bigger colonies, the whole colony survives over winter. The other 2 pictures there are just for illustration. That's what a honeybee swarm can look like. which can be up to 20,000-30,000 bees, and our friends who come around and plague us in the autumn, wasps. Wasps colouring is the clue between a honeybee and a wasp. Honeybees tend not to have that bright yellowness to them. So let's just have a look at what happens when we're talking about bees. So in a hive, we've got 3 types of bees, what they call castes. 99% of the hive is made up of female workers, and they do pretty much everything in the hive. There are a small number, normally numbered in the low hundreds, of drones, which are the boys. Boys have a pretty easy life. They go around, they munch honey, and their main job is to mate with the queen, which is why they have very large eyes and very strong thorax, their middle section, so they can chase queens and mate with them. Apart from that, they don't do much else. The downside to their existence is come autumn time, they're surplus, the colony doesn't need them anymore, and the workers will physically drag them out the front door and kick them out to die. The third caste you get in a hive is the queen. Now, queens are a little bit longer. There's normally only one of them ever in a hive. There are some circumstances where that's slightly changed. Normally there's only one queen. She's bigger, she's mum to everyone. She lays all the eggs in the hive. She produces all the bees in the hive are her offspring. She can lay up to 1,500, 2,000 eggs a day. So she's just a mini egg laying machine. She will live for 3 to 5 years, whereas a worker bee and a drone, their life expectancy is in weeks, sort of 6 weeks in the summertime. The diagram over on the right-hand side there is a hive. This particular hive is what they call a British national hive, which is what probably 2/3 plus of beekeepers in England and the UK use. Hives, and we'll talk about this in more detail, are a modular system. They're normally made of wood, but increasingly some are made of polystyrene now. We'll talk a little bit about the benefits of one over the other. Personally, I prefer wood. Other people prefer polystyrene, but it's made up of levels. So you've got a way in at the front on the floor, and the floors these days are normally made of mesh. Again, explain why in a bit. The chamber above that is called the brood box or the brood body. That's the area where the queen normally lives and lays eggs, so it's like the nursery. Then there's this thing called a queen excluder, which is a mesh which stops the queen, who's physically larger, moving into the upper boxes. And the upper boxes are called supers, and that's where the honey's stored. There's then an internal lid called a crown board and an external lid, which is the roof. This hive can start from anything sort of from just a brood box. Maybe in the spring you add a super. These things can get up to about head height as you keep adding supers if it's a big busy colony. So that's just a typical illustration, but it's a modular system. You can make it bigger and smaller depending on the time of year. And just a little picture of some beekeepers there with some smallish hives. I'm checking them out. So what's going on inside the hive? So within the hive, you've got removable frames, which are made of wood. And within those frames, you put a thin layer of wax foundation, which you buy from suppliers. And the bees then draw out wax combs into 3 dimensions, which is the little picture at the bottom there. Really clever how they do it. Very precise process of doing it. And they make the wax on their bodies to do it. Once they've made those cells, they then fill them with either honey or pollen, or the queen lays eggs in them and they raise brood in them. So they're a multiple purpose storage unit. And then the picture above is a queen surrounded by workers, and the little dot on her back is a dot that beekeepers put on to make sure that we can find her more easily. It's important to be able to find her if we can, and just that makes her that much more easy to find. That's a process which takes a little bit of confidence to mark your queen, but it's doable. Hive types. I mentioned in the picture earlier that what the majority of beekeepers in England use is a national hive. There are an awful lot of different types of hive. However, the problem is that they are all completely incompatible with each other. The frame sizes are different, the footprint's different, the bits don't fit together. Once you've decided on a type of hive, you've made it, and you make that decision very early on, it's then an expensive thing to have to move away from it. So if you can stick with it, stick with it. So it's important to make your choice early and get that choice right. The one on the top row beside the national is a thing called a bee house, which is a plastic double hive. They were popular briefly and have really faded away. The hive in the bottom row, the Langstroth is a hugely popular make of hive or type of hive all around the world. Not very popular in the UK. This particular one is made of polystyrene. Now, polystyrene is an interesting material because it's becoming increasingly more available. It has very good insulation properties, better than wood, but some people don't like it because it's more easily damaged, and some people don't like it because it's a plastic and people have issues with putting more plastic in the world. My hives are mostly wood, although some of my smaller, what they call newt boxes, are made out of poly. So I lean towards wood, but it's a decision that you will be faced with early on. The poly hives work okay, and they're getting better. I'm a little bit long in the tooth, so I stick with what I've already got. Top bar hives are something that's a bit of a left field choice. They work very well in developing countries where it's warmer, because those countries tend to be hotter. So in a hive that works vertically, heat rises. In the top bar hives, because they're wider than they are taller, you can get cold patches. They're not quite as good on insulation. So some people prefer them because they see them as a more natural way of beekeeping. I think that's very true in the countries where they're used more commonly, but less so in the UK. And then we have a thing called the WBC hive, which is basically very often a national hive, but with this rather attractive second skin put on it, which kind of helps with insulation. It does make it a bit of a faff when you want to actually inspect in the hive, because you've got to, it's a bit like kind of unpeeling it before you can actually do any work. But those are the types. I would suggest to you, look at wooden nationals first, but be aware that there are other alternatives that may well appeal to you. So just a few honeybee facts. We know that honeybees have been around for at least 30 million years, and their ancestry probably is Asia, then moving to Africa, and then spreading. They evolved from wasps originally. In a colony, as I said earlier, you can get up to about 60,000 bees midsummer, sometimes more, sometimes less, but that's an average number. Mostly female workers, one queen, and a few hundred drones. In the UK, we've got about 40,000 beekeepers is an estimate, with about 250 to 300,000 colonies. Guesstimates vary a bit. That's a lot down from what it was a century ago. We're probably talking about more like 1 million colonies kept in the UK. But as people became more urban, the numbers of bee colonies tended to drift away. If you had a small holding, it was a very common thing to have a hive of bees, less so now. Honey is what a lot of beekeepers keep their bees for. You aren't going to get a guarantee that you're going to get a crop, especially in your first year when you've started with a small colony. But a good average, which is a bit of a kind of odd thing to say, people often will say that you can get about £40 of honey off a colony in a year, which will be about 2 supers full of honey, 2 of the smaller boxes full of honey. That's probably on the ambitious side. Honey crops vary with the weather year from year, and colonies vary. So not all your colonies will do that. Some might get more, some may get nothing at all. It's an average. Each bee only makes a twelfth of a teaspoonful of honey in its life. So 12 bees, their whole working life, makes 1 teaspoon of honey. It does kind of add some value to what you've got there. They'll fly a couple of miles, up to 3 miles, to find food, which is one issue. If you want to move your beehives, you can move them a very small distance or under 3 feet, or you can move them a very long distance over 3 miles. If you move them an intermediate distance, they'll fly back to the original site and go, where's my home gone? So when you set up a colony in an apiary, know where you're going to put it and try not to move that. The taste and flavour of honey will be down to the forage that they've been finding. So oilseed rape, the big yellow fields, will be a pale honey that granulates quite quickly, has a fairly mild taste. Heather honey is a kind of gloopy honey that has a very strong taste. Lot of different variety there, which does sometimes make you wonder when you go to the supermarket and you find all the honey looking almost identical and sometimes being sold for like £1 a pound or not much more than that. Is that really honey? Not always, no. Sometimes there's a lot of fake honey out there. One of the things as a beekeeper you need to make sure is that those bees, they will make excess honey, but primarily they're making honey so they can survive through the winter, because they won't be collecting any from October through till about March. If you take all their honey away from them, they will starve. So you need to balance how much you can take. You need to leave them with 40 pounds of honey. Anything above that is your share, but don't let them starve. You can feed them. You can take more honey and feed them back, but you just have to be careful that you don't let them starve over winter. And a couple of the pictures there are a frame full of capped honey, which is top left, with that nice white capping. Then taking the capping off in the extraction process and then putting it in a small extractor to then rotate it as a centrifuge and take the honey out. A little bit more on the facts sort of. So the honey, the nectar rather, that bees collect is their carbohydrate source. So it's their sugars. The pollen they collect is to feed the young, and that's their protein source. So the pollen, when you see bees coming back to the hive, on their back legs, you'll often see these little yellow pollen baskets. They're bringing back food for the young. We've talked about roughly how many sort of species of bee there are. And yes. Okay. One little thing that will become sort of something that you need to learn carefully in time is just the life cycle of bees. And I mention it now just so you have an idea of it. Don't worry if you don't remember the detail. But when a queen lays an egg, for a worker, which is the vast majority of the bees, it's an egg for 3 days. It then changes into a larvae for 6 days, and then the cell's capped and it pupates, it metamorphosizes and changes into an adult over the next 12 days. And at day 21, it hatches out as an adult bee. That process is a little bit shorter for queens and a little bit longer for drones, the boys. Once the bee hatches out, it goes through, and that picture on the right shows you it goes through, so the bees go through some stages based on age. So they first start out as the workers start out as cleaners, and they clean the hive and the cells. They then progress to nurse bees, so they look after the sort of younger bees in the larval stage. They then process honey as they get a little bit older. They then become guard bees. And then as they get into their that's the first 3 weeks of their adult life. The last 3 weeks of their adult life is as foragers who go out and bring stuff back into the hive. 6 weeks, and that's life over for an adult worker in the summer. Hard life. Wax is another product from the hive, and this is why a lot of beekeepers, as well as honey, it's a cash crop. It can be sold. So wax is created by bees from glands on their belly, which is the little lower picture there, those little wax scales. They then chew it in their mouths and make the shapes and the comb in the hive. You can harvest that wax during the year from waste comb and cappings and what they call brace comb, bits of comb that they build in odd places in the hives. that makes really good candles, which burn slowly. They don't smoke very much. It's quite a valuable commodity. Propolis is a less known product of the hive, which is they go out and they collect resin from trees. They bring that back, and it's this sticky brown subject. Whenever you go into a beehive, you will find it, all the edges sealed with propolis. So they use it to seal up their hive, to make it sort of windproof, waterproof, and to cover the internal surfaces, because they make it's strongly antibacterial, so it makes the hive more hygienic. As I say, it's tree resin. It's incredibly sticky. If you get it on clothes and stuff and hands, looks like you've been smoking for 20 years, and it's really hard to get out of clothing. So that's one of the reasons you would tend to wear a bee suit. It does have very strongly antimicrobial elements, so it gets used in skin tinctures and things like that as a health product. So what are the bees that we're talking about? Honeybees. So they're a social insect. They're so social, it's called a eusocial insect, because they work as a collective. Mostly female, they're wild, they're not really domesticated, as you will find out. The concept of all these bees working together is called a superorganism. So they work together in such a way that this group almost exists like a creature, and the bees are almost like cells within this creature, all with their own individual jobs to do, but working collectively. They will sacrifice themselves for the good of the colony. So bees will sting you to defend others, even though that will kill that individual bee. Once they've stung you, the barbed sting stays in your skin, and that bee will die afterwards, which is why bees tend to sting defensively as opposed to aggressively like a wasp, because the bees do have an sort of understanding that that's it if they do that. Bees have co-evolved with flowers, which they need that relationship with, because that's the food supply. They live in large colonies, and they produce a foodstuff that humans use, and they're one of the very few, if not the only insect that does that. We've said already, a couple of hundred types of bee in the UK, 25 bumblebees, most of them solitary bees, and our honeybee. So honeybees have predators. Just very briefly, I want to sort of bring your awareness to this thing called the Asian hornet. Asian hornets have been introduced to France about 15 years ago, accidentally from China, and they've been moving through Europe very quickly. They've just about reached the UK, and we're very, very on alert to try and stop them establishing in the UK. If you've ever seen a European hornet, which we don't really get this far north apart from very exceptionally, European hornets are big. An Asian hornet is slightly smaller and has this distinctive single orangey yellow band. Just be aware of them. They're a problem for beekeepers, so we just like to raise people's awareness to them, because we'd really rather they weren't in the UK. Just going to run you through, this isn't going to get too scientific, don't worry, but just to run you through a few aspects of what a bee, how a bee's made up. You can see from that picture, they're really hairy. And the bees up here tend to be darker and hairier because it keeps them warmer. So we talk about often people will talk about black bees or native bees or brown bees. The bees up in England and the bees further north tend to be a bit more darker. This is what a bee looks like with a big pollen sac on its back legs. It's three sections essentially: a head with the eyes, the mouth parts, and the antenna. The thorax, where the wings are attached, it has two pairs of wings that almost look like one, but they are kind of almost velcroed together. And then the abdomen, which is where all the organs are and a lot of the glands are. And at the end, you get the sting. Bees are quite clever. They need to communicate to each other in the hive, so they dance. The dances have multiple purposes, but perhaps the most commonly known one is the waggle dance, which when they perform it in the hive on the comb, it will tell other bees who are close by how far and in what direction to fly to find the forage that they're after, that the other bees already found. So bees are clever. They've got scout bees who go out and find new forage sources. They come back, they report to the other workers who then follow their instructions and go out and bring the resources back. It's beautiful to see. It was only discovered about 50, 60 years ago by a German guy called von Frisch. It is a fascinating process, and it's really clever. Why are bees important in a wider sense? Okay, we get some honey out of them, we get some wax out of them and other things, but the principal reason for beekeeping is, for a lot of farmers' point of view, is that they pollinate everything. There are some wind-blown pollinated crops, but an awful lot of crops are pollinated by insects, not just bees, but bees play a big part in that. So for certain crops like almonds in America, they move well over 50% of all the bees in the US to California for a month from February to March. Otherwise, the almonds wouldn't get pollinated. It's less intense in the UK, but that process still happens. And it's an important part of it. So what do bees forage on? This is a very small selection of kind of plants, but just to show you a yearly kind of cycle. So this time of year, there really isn't much out for bees to forage on. Maybe some mahonia, but the season will start with the snowdrops in sort of January, February, and not a lot will happen until sort of March, April, when the bees start to become active again. Bees won't work much below 10 degrees, but once it gets above 10 degrees and there's a reason to go out, they'll start. Oilseed rape, the big yellow fields, is a great crop. Dandelions, I'm sorry for all you really tidy gardeners, but dandelions are a great early forage source for bees. So maybe don't kind of kill all your dandelions in the garden. Some tree sources like sycamore and lime can be good. Weeds can be good. Rosemary, willow herb. Heather's a good late crop. As I say, this is just a tiny snapshot. Bees will go out, and most of the honey you will get in the UK is what they call multifloral. The bees will forage on any source that's local to them, especially in urban areas, and those sources can be incredibly diverse. You need to keep an eye, especially early in the year, February, March time, that the bees have got coming out of winter with enough food just in that little gap before the flowers to keep going. This is just a little illustration of what would happen in a supermarket if you took bees out of the equation. So suddenly all the fruit and veg that are on the displays there, a lot less of them would be around. It just helps. Nuts and fruit are some of the key things that bees pollinate. It's very hard, and I'm not sure I entirely like it, but when you look at protection of bees and things like that, unless you can put a cost on it or a value on it, people will sort of sometimes tend to ignore it. So this just tries to put a little bit of some numbers on its hundreds of billions of pounds of benefits that bees do for humanity. And it is the economic value that sometimes means that people to sit up and take notice of kind of not creating situations where bees really struggle. Okay, the sting. It's the thing that people talk about most. It's the first question you'll get asked if you take an observation hive out to a show or something like that. Do you get stung? The answer is yes, you do. The more careful you are as a beekeeper, the bees are attracted to movement. Their eyes are very sensitive to movement. If you work slowly and calmly and you don't bang things around and you're working with relatively gentle bees, those bees will normally leave you alone. If you crash and bang around and do stuff in a hurry and you've got some sort of bit grumpy bees, yeah, you'll kind of know about it. A sting is hidden within the body most of the time. When they're angry or when they're disturbed, they will poke that sting out and they will position their body, bend and stick it into you. It is barbed. The best way is to use a hive tool, which is something I'll mention in a minute, is what you use to get into the hive. It's your standard sort of thing you have in your hand the whole time. You just scrape the sting out because it won't come out easily. You try not to squeeze it. If you squeeze it, you'll squeeze more venom in. So you try and scrape it out. Your reaction to a sting, if it's normal, should be a little bit of local swelling, a little bit of local redness, which will itch a bit maybe and disappear within sort of 24 hours. However, it may cause problems. You need to be sensitive to the fact that people's sting reactions vary. At the very, very far end of the reaction of the spectrum is anaphylactic reaction, and anaphylaxis can kill you. I'm just looking at a couple of questions. I will mention flow hives in a minute. Siting a hive I will come on to in a minute as well. Yes, we'll come back to those questions. Hopefully I will cover them. But I've noted what you got there. Right. Hang on, just get this thing to advance. Right, a swarm of bees. A colony will build up over the year from very small in the winter, about 10,000 bees, to 50, 60,000 bees midsummer. By sort of May, June is probably when it's getting, end of May, June is when it's getting to its peak. If that hive becomes overcrowded, if that hive decides its queen is getting old, it may do this process called swarming, where the old queen will leave with half to 2/3 of the population of the hive. So this enormous number of bees, up to 30,000 bees, come pouring out of the hive in a minute or so. They will then go and settle in a tree nearby in this big kind of rugby ball shape for a couple of hours, maybe a day. They're at that stage looking for a new home. When that process happens, you are on the cusp of losing half of your bees. You will also cause real fear to the public. It's a lot of bees, and when they first come out of the hive, it's this big, black, incredibly noisy tornado. People have sort of said when they've seen a swarm go over, I thought it was a plane going over my house really lowly. You can do things to avoid that. As an urban beekeeper, it's something that you really want to try and avoid, because it can be a nuisance. And as I say, you lose half your bees and your honey crop for that year. It's something you learn about fairly quickly. Just to talk a little bit about threats to bees. Things that humans have done have made bees' life a bit harder, to the fact that bees are fairly dependent on us now. We've brought in pests, we've brought in disease, we've changed the landscape, we've added chemicals to it. All those add stress onto the bees. Losses in this country are tolerable, but in other countries where they maybe have more intensive beekeeping, losses can be very high. In the US, they're typically 40% of colonies a year. There's no one solution, there's no one cause. It's just worth being aware that there is this kind of whole series of threats to bees. So in England, as we've talked about 40,000 beekeepers, about 250, 300,000 hives, about 400 bee farmers who are beekeepers with 40 hives or more. Lots of local associations who are there to kind of help and support you. I'm going to take a little look now at a hive itself. So these are some different styles of hives. Some are mine, some in Paris, some in New York, and some rather extraordinary ones up in Hexham, which were a special build. But we're just going to look about the components of a hive. It starts, if you remember that picture from the beginning, it starts with a floor. So that's the way into the hive. It's normally made of a metal mesh. The metal mesh is so that this pest called varroa can fall out of the hive, but finds it hard to get back in. On top of it is a brood box. This is the nursery chamber. The queen lives in this all year round. It will have normally 11 frames in it, these wooden frames. The queen will progressively, as spring goes into summer, lay in more and more and more and more of those frames. Occasionally you need an extra box for her to lay in, but that's not for now. You then put this metal mesh, or sometimes it's a plastic mesh, on top of the brood box, which means the queen can't actually move from that lower brood box chamber into the upper chamber. And those upper chambers are called supers, and they're used for honey storage. And the mesh stops the bees. There will be some honey stored in the lower boxes, but bees have got a natural instinct to store honey above and that's the instinct we go with. You can have 1, 2, 3 supers, or even sometimes more. 2 is common. That's capped off by this thing called a crown board, and a crown board is just an internal lid. It's often got some little holes in it because you can use it for another function, which is to clear as a clearer board, which means if you put that board below the super with some special little things in them called porter bee escapes, which work like one-way valves, the bees can go down through it, but they can't come back up again. And that means that if you want to take a honey super off, if you put that board underneath, you can clear it of bees and hopefully come to an empty box that you can take away easily. But essentially a crown board is an internal lid. And then you have a roof, which is often galvanized metal on the top, on a wooden frame, which just keeps the weather out. These are some of the things that you need to work with bees. Not all at the beginning, but some of them. So a smoker is a valuable thing. If you're buying a smoker, buy a nice large one because they stay alight longer. We mentioned porter bee escapes. Those are the little things that will fit in the holes in the crown board. Hive tools are your standard thing. Because the bees propolize all the boxes together, if you want to get in between those boxes, it's very hard just to lift them off because they're all stuck together. So you need to physically put that hive tool in and use it like a little crowbar to crack the boxes so you can lift them off. Gloves, you need things like mouse guards and other things are accessories. I won't go around to those in too much details just right now because it would just be too much. Once you go inside, this is looking down on a hive in these top 2 pictures. So these are the wooden frames. And to illustrate, if bees were left by themselves, they do something very similar. The right-hand picture is what they would do. The left-hand picture is what we do. And these wooden removable frames were developed about 150 years ago in the States by a guy called Langstroth. And before that, you had to pretty much destroy a hive to get the honey out. He had this clever idea of removable frames that meant you could check a hive, remove the honey without destroying or damaging the hive. The bottom picture, and we'll go through a few of these, is roughly what you'll see as you go through the frames in a hive. So an outer frame in the box will have very little going on it. The wax might not be fully drawn and very few bees. As you go into the hive, there's this layer of wax foundation, which, as I say, you buy. The bees have started to draw that into 3 dimensions and you've got more bees. You've gone a few more frames in, a lot more bees, and you're seeing that the frames have got something in them. So these sort of biscuit colored cappings are brood, which is waiting to hatch out. So these are pupa in the last 12 days of their transition to an adult. Some of the cells you'll see at the bottom, the cappings look fractionally different. You might not be able to see on this picture, but they're slightly domed and they're slightly wider. So those are the boy cells, those are the drone cells. That's the end of this first section. Bear with me. I'm just going to stop sharing, show a little video, and then we'll come back to a little bit about more the getting started in beekeeping stuff. So bear with me. And let me get my little video up. You may not be able to hear this little video terribly well. I'm just going to use it really to illustrate what goes on in a hive, and I hope you can see it and maybe even hear it moderately. I'll take a chance this morning to talk you through having a look at some bees in what this is, or these are, which are national beehives. Beehives are kind of just a bunch of wooden boxes. This lower box is the box that the queen lives in all year round. It's called a brood box. Then we've got a little board we put in between, which is called queen excluder. And then we've got the upper boxes, which are the supers, where the honey's stored. So we'll just have a little look in and see what's going on in this hive. To check the hives in summer every 7 days, because there is a chance that honeybees want to swarm. Oops, sorry. To avoid that, we do everything we can to, because we lose half our bees, we won't get a honey crop, and swarms are a bit scary for the problem. Sorry about that. So the apple box, we can judge by what's the weight of it, whether there's anything much in there. This one's fairly light. This is a fairly small colony. And we just stack it out way for the moment. Excluder, as I say, that just keeps the queen in the lower box, which her nursery eggs and raises her young. That comes off. We check the other side that she's not on there because we don't want to put her outside the hive. And then we go through these frames in a hive. Now the outer frame is called the dummy board, and that's just a blank to fill in the empty space. Oops. So we use a smoker on bees. The smoke just pacifies them. If they think there's kind of like a forest fire nearby, they'll fill with honey. That makes them less prone to stinging. It also masks their alarm pheromone, which masks their communication to get across with you. So in an empty frame, the outside frames are normally empty. A little bit of sealed honey up there, and a little bit of nectar. But nothing much is happening on an outer frame. So we can check these frames fairly quickly on these outer ones because they're largely empty. As I say, this is a fairly small colony. We need to make a decision relatively soon whether it's going to be strong enough to make it through winter or whether it's going to need some help. So on a frame like this, we've got some sealed honey. We've got some lovely coloured pollen. We've got some purple, which is probably Phacelia. We've got some yellow, not sure what that's from. We've got a mixture of bees. So we've got some drones, all the fairly big bees. They're the boys. There are a few hundred of those in the hive. Most of the bees you see, all the bees around this area, are female workers. Drone there, female workers there. Boys are bigger, and the female workers do pretty much everything in the hive. They raise the young, they look after the queen, and they go and forage when they're a bit older. Often once you've seen a frame like that with a load of pollen on it, the next frame you see has got young unhatched bees in it. And here we've got sealed brood. And there we've got a bee with pollen on its back legs. Oh, and down here we've got the queen. We put a blue mark on her to make her easier to find in the hive. So she's quite a nice queen. Sealed brood there, some unsealed brood around it. And on the other side, oh, queen's popped over onto the other side as well now. And sealed brood there and unsealed brood, so that's good. So we've popped that frame in ever so carefully. There's only ever one queen in a hive, almost always, very occasionally not. So she's precious and we don't want to do her any damage. Nice frame of brood there. This here is called a queen cup. And we just check those to see if there's anything in them, because we don't want there to be a swarm. At this time of year, we're in August now, it's unlikely, but we just check. So a nice frame of sealed brood there. On the second frame, see how much brood we've got in this colony. And on the third frame there, so we've got brood, nectar stored around and pollen stored around because they put the food sources near where they need it to feed the young. Same again on that side. In summer, a honeybee colony can build up to about 40, 50, 60,000 bees. This one is not anywhere near that. This is probably about 20,000 or so or less. Nothing but pollen on that frame. And I can see from the last few frames, there's not a lot going on there. And that's a quick look around a honeybee colony. If you want to know more about bees, then come to our Facebook page. Righty-ho. So that just gave you a little bit of a look into a hive, because you can learn a lot of stuff from books, you can learn a lot of theory, but until you actually get the practical aspect of beekeeping, which is where an association can help you, or your own colony in time, it's half the process. Beekeeping is a practical activity. I know some beekeepers, I know a couple of people who come from very academic backgrounds who they never want to read a book about beekeeping at all. They love it and like it because it's a practical process and they learn by doing it. It is kind of like a craft skill. And that's what's so nice about it. The way you work in a hive, you will learn over time and gain confidence in. That's a reasonably small colony that I was using, so I could go through it relatively quickly. That will be probably the size of colony that when you get a new colony, which is often called a newt colony from someone, that will often be about the size of the colony you get. So that's where you start off. They can get quite a bit bigger than that. What I'm going to do now is I'm just going to move on to the second section, which is another PowerPoint, and I'm going to run through that. So bear with me again while I find that other presentation, and just I'll be within 2 seconds. Hopefully I won't lose you, but I just need to swap some things over here. Right, hopefully I should be able to share my screen. Great, I hope that's worked. And hopefully pull that full screen. Right, so now we're going to talk a little bit more about actually you as a new beekeeper kicking off. We've understood a fair bit about the bees and the hives themselves. So the aims of this really are to talk about the equipment that you'll need, getting hold of bees, setting up an apiary, who your contacts are, just the whole process of early on. When I first started off 10, 11 years ago now, I wish I'd had a lot of this information available. Some of what I've got in this part of the presentation, I will have sent you hopefully in our little document that we talked about earlier, our Getting Started document. You will also find a lot of this in the Good Beekeeping Guide books that hopefully you'll grab a copy of. So as we've talked about, it's not just a hobby for retired old blokes anymore. It's much broader than that. So don't feel that, oh, you won't fit or you won't be. There are some horror stories from decades ago of kind of people not feeling that they were terribly welcome in beekeeping groups. It really doesn't apply anymore. Beekeeping groups love having as diverse a group of people in them as possible. It changes the dynamic. It's really good to have that. It's a great hobby. It does take some of your time. You need to, it will take, for each colony, if you plan about an hour a week, unfortunately, it can't be any old hour. It needs to be an hour in the middle of the day. It needs to be an hour roughly 6 or 7 days from when you previously checked the hive, sometimes a bit more frequently. It's like any livestock. They need looking after, and they need looking after when they need looking after, not when it suits around your lifestyle, which can at times be a little bit inconvenient. It's not the cheapest of hobbies to get set up with a bee suit and a hive and your first colony of bees and accessories, stuff like that. It's probably going to set you back about £500. The learning curve in the first year is steep, which is why it's very useful to have a group around you who can support you. Planning is great. Now, a lot of people will come to us, as I was mentioning earlier, in sort of May, June time and go, oh, I want to start beekeeping, I want to start now. What you've done in coming along to this session at this time of year means that you've got some time to read some books, think about the equipment you're going to buy, make some decisions, and you're not having to do it against the clock. You've got some time to do it. Okay, so we talked about this a little bit before. Join a beekeeping association, go on a beginner's course. Our local beginner's course is at Kirkby Hall, Northumberland College, which is a great course. I did it myself a good while ago, and it really is good. Last year, sadly, they had to cancel the course. This year, they're going to run it in a virtual format. There will be courses like that in an area near you. Your local beekeeping association will know what courses there are, or you may find them independently. It doesn't matter. They will often start in something like March because they're trying to get people prepped to start that season. So they'll often run March through to May. They should include both theory and practical. Courses that are just all theory will give you some of the stuff you need, but will miss a valuable thing. So please, if you're looking at a course, try and find one. Now, this year, that may be more challenging than most years because of COVID. I can't think of an easy way around that. What you will find, and off the back of that video that I showed you earlier, is our association last year knew that we had this as a problem, and we started a YouTube channel and we videoed a lot of our inspections. And our YouTube channel is Newcastle and District Beekeepers, or Newcastle District Beekeepers. There will be a lot of tutorial videos on there. There are also some other great sources, and I'll come on to it in a bit. One of the best is a guy called Steve Spinks, who runs an organization called Norfolk Honey. And he has got the most expansive collection of how-to videos on his website that you will come across. He was an ex-bee inspector. He really knows what he's talking about. A lot of the stuff you'll find online can be from Australia and America, and their beekeeping is different. So just beware, if you hear a funny accent, the beekeeping that they may be talking about won't be fundamentally different, but will be different enough to take you down some blind alleys. So try and stick to UK stuff and a good reference book. Okay, so let's go through the kit. As I said, £500-ish. Your hive is going to cost you 150, and you can go north of that as far as you want. There are some very good beginners kits that you can get, which bundle a lot of the things together, and they start around the 150 mark. They won't be the best quality wood. They won't be the kind of, everything won't be top notch, but they're good, cost-effective bundles. Some of the companies, one of the biggest companies is, don't have it here, is called Thorn, who are based in Lincolnshire. They have a sale, incidentally, which starts in a couple of days' time on the 29th. Buying in the sales can often save you an awful lot of money. Other companies you'll find listed in that document I've sent out to you include Paynes, Maysmore, Bee Equipment, smaller companies like Cadden. There are a number of suppliers around, but with the time you've got before you want to start, do a little bit of shopping around, but just be aware that there are some sales on. Now, bee suits are part of your personal protection. You can choose a full suit, head to toe, which most people prefer. You can choose just a jacket. You'll need some gloves and wellies to go with them. I would try and avoid buying the leather gloves that often get bundled with new beekeeper kits, because the leather gloves are terrible. You can't feel anything when you're wearing them. They will give you good protection, but in terms of hygiene and disease, they're a disaster. So we tend to use sort of very thin medical nitrile gloves. A bee suit, the main suppliers are companies like BB and Sheriff. Now, those suits aren't cheap. They'll cost you £100 to £150. You will find a lot of the cheaper suits, the zips go, and the veils, the plastic in the veils isn't very long lasting, so they will fail after a couple of years. You can pick them up for 30 or 40 quid, so you might think for the first year or so, that's I don't want to go the whole hog, but BB and Sheriff are where I'd direct you. Smokers are a vital piece of kit. A larger one will stay alight longer, so I go for the larger ones. Hive tool is the jemmy that you use to lever between the boxes. The standard tool is the one that I'd recommend, and they're about £5 to £10 each. If you're going to buy one, it might be an idea to buy two, because when it falls out your pocket into the long grass and you can't find it, it's a real bore. So maybe get yourself a spare. Mouse guards are a little thing that sits across the front of the hive in winter time that keeps mice out. Hive straps. Hives are spectacularly unaerodynamic. So if you get a storm like we've had in the last 24 hours, it's not impossible for a hive to get blown over. If you've put a big strap around the hive, then if the hive does go over, then it will at least stay in one piece, so the bees stand a chance of survival. If the hive breaks into components, they're pretty much doomed in winter. You also, in the autumn, need a type of feeder. Those are something that you put sugar syrup in to top them up. So that's a basic kit list. As I say, £500-ish, but you could easily spend more. We've done a little bit about the hive types. Won't over-explain that again. It's a modular system. Starter kits. So if you've talked a little bit about what you can get, ideally your first hive will have a roof, a crown board. Starter kits that you buy, the beginner's kits, will often sometimes only have one super in it. Ideally, you want a minimum of 2 supers. Ideally, you want 3 supers. So just watch, if you think you're getting an amazing bundle, just look at things like how many supers it's got, because if it's only got 1, you're almost immediately going to have to go out and spend another 25 quid on a second one. So it might not be the best deal. Frames come in a frightening number of kind of descriptions, all with these code numbers. For national hives, you get this SN, which is shallow national, which are frames that fit in the super. The number that goes after it, if it's a 1, it's a simple frame. So these frames don't have any way of being spaced apart themselves. You have to do it by eye, or you can get things to add on to them. The frames that end with a 4 are what they call self-spacing frames, or the SN4 ones. Sorry if this gets a little bit complicated. I will try and explain it as simply as I can. I just want to make you aware of it. SN4s are what they call Hoffman frames, self-spacing frames. They just mean that those frames stay a little bit apart and they're worth that little bit extra money. Queen excluders, they will come in often in the bundles with a plastic one. Those fit flush on the top of the frames and can squash bees. The ones that are wooden frame with wire are better. A brood box, and again, DN is deep national, so will fit in the brood box, the frames. The 4 means that they're these self-spacing frames again, because bees need to be able to work between the frames. If they can't actually have space to get up and down between them, they can't work them. And so they need to be a little bit apart. And you obviously need the foundation to go in those frames to start them off. Then an open mesh floor. The bundles often don't come with a stand. You need to ideally raise the hive off the ground. You can use an old wooden pallet, but you're going to do a lot of bending. Ideally, that stand wants to be about 12, 16 inches high, so you don't do so much bending when you're inspecting a hive. And then, as we've talked about, the extras you need: a bee suit, a smoker, hive tools, straps, and all the other little bits and pieces. That's the kind of kit that you want. Having one hive for one colony sounds great. However, if your colony decides that it's going to swarm in May, June, July time, where are you going to put that swarm? As a minimum, I would suggest you seriously consider buying yourself a newt box, a small half-sized hive. As an ideal, I would suggest for every hive that you have that's got bees in it, you have a complete spare hive ready and waiting just for that moment, because what you find in May, June, July is you get a swarm, you've got nowhere to put it, you go to the suppliers, you hope they can deliver quickly, and they'll say, yes, that's great, we'll have that with you in about 6 weeks' time. That isn't much good when your bees are hanging out of a tree right here and now. So it's always have more spare kit. And as a beekeeper, you will be going back to the sales every spring for a bit more kit and a bit more kit and a bit more kit. It's just the way it goes. Hive materials. So the best wood you can choose is Western red cedar, but it's the most expensive. It's light, it's long lasting. Cedar is a good second. It tends to come with more knots, but it's still a very good wood. Pine, or which is also it's called whitewood or red deal, can be heavier. It will probably need a wood treatment to extend its life. It will be cheaper, but it won't last as long. You get what you pay for. Plywood will work. It tends to be heavy. It can delaminate. It's not a great choice, but again, it will be a budget price. Polystyrene, great insulation, lots of pros for it. Doesn't tend to be as tough. It's not as easy to clean. There are pros and cons. You will find plenty of information out there that will argue both ways on that. Personally, I go for wood. The hive types we've talked about. I would recommend that you look seriously at nationals. There is a thing called a 14 by 12, which is a big version of a national. It's just physically deeper. There is a hive called the Smith's hive, which is used a lot in Scotland. Similar dimensions, but rectangular. Langstroth, not used much in the UK. WBC, which is, we've gone through that. It's pretty, but not that practical. The one that somebody raised earlier and was asking about flow hive. It's an interesting type of hive. It was developed in Australia. It was developed very specifically for Australian beekeeping, which is less seasonal. It doesn't have as big a winter. And it was designed so that the honey extraction process is simpler, because the way that the frames in the super work is that you can turn a crank, crack the frames, and the honey comes out the back. In the UK, there are some things that you need to consider. In the UK, quite a lot of the crops we get, like ivy and oilseed rape and heather, don't flow. So you can get these frames that nothing will ever come out of, and it's hard to get the hives out. They're also, the honey out. They're also expensive, significantly more expensive than other types of hives. I know people who've got them. I know people who quite like them. I would sort of say just consider very carefully before you go down a flow hive. They've got huge marketing and very, very successful marketing. I'm not sure for a beginner it's where I would recommend you start. I think you could run into some quite significant problems apart from the costs there. There are a whole load of other hives which I'm not going to go into for the moment because there's just too many to go through. Look at nationals first. Look at wooden nationals first, in my opinion, and then spread your kind of, if you can, sort of during your course or by reading a book or by looking at some other websites, get some more information. Great. Just make an informed choice, because they are all totally incompatible. When you go down one route, it's an expensive thing to have to change. So these are what a few of them look like. National hives, the one picture I showed you earlier had what they call a gabled roof, a sort of peaked roof. Those are a real pain, because when you inspect a hive, what you want to do is flip the roof upside down, then stack all the other boxes that you're not using in it. We've talked about Langstroth, top bar, WBC, and there's an illustration of the flow hive with the kind of pipes going out the back. It's based on a Langstroth hive, so the frames again are non-standard for the UK, which in my view is a little bit of a downside, because if you want to buy a newt box or bees off another person, they will almost always be on a wrong sized frame to fit into those hives. So you can set yourself some early challenges there. Okay, we talked a little bit about time. So the winter, you don't need to do much. From October to March, you might need to check those colonies to make sure that they haven't tipped over in the wind, to make sure nothing untoward's happened to them, but very little to do. April, July is very busy. You need to be checking those hives at least every 7 days, possibly even less in sort of if you see early signs of swarming. Your main job then is to keep that colony together, which is not always something you can do, but you're trying to avoid swarming. Swarm control and swarm prevention is a whole different subject together. Just be aware it exists, won't cover it in too much details. Don't plan too many holidays in May and June, unless you've got somebody to take over for you. Having a bee buddy is a really good idea, because you can help them, they can help you. if you're going away for a week, they can come and kind of keep an eye on yours, and you can return the favour to them. And an association you may find bee buddies that way. It's good to work like that if you possibly can. Each hive, 30 to 60 minutes. You'll be slower checking a hive when you start out. You will gather pace and more confidence as you go along. But allow 30 to 60 minutes initially. Getting hold of bees. Okay. Most beekeepers will suggest to you, if you can get bees as local to you as possible, do that. They will be well adapted to the area that you live in. I live in northeast England. If I were to buy imported bees from Greece or Italy, and they go through a northeast winter, they're going to be in for one almighty shock to the system, and they may not come out in spring alive. You will find through an association, or you will find local beekeepers who've either got more colonies that they want, bee farmers who sell colonies. You just need to tap into that network that's around you to find out. Other beekeepers may have come through winter with too many bees and want to sell some colonies early in the season. Other beekeepers may raise colonies specifically for sale. These small colonies are often called nukes. A nuke is a word to describe the box they're kept in, but also the colony itself. So it's spelled N-U-C, and people will say, oh, I've got some nukes for sale or whatever. They should consist of up to 4 to 6 frames. They should have a queen. They should have brood on 2 to 3 frames when you buy them, and they should have a good number of good amount of stores and plenty of worker bees. The cost for those colonies will vary from 100 would be a good price to get them. 50 is off the prices are heading these days. So you want to make sure when you're paying that much money that you're getting value. Local bees described as Black British or in realistic varieties are intermixed, so probably do best in your area. If you can check the colony before you buy it, great. Not everybody will offer that, but if you can, great. You'll find out a little bit about whether that colony is gentle, and you want it to be disease-free. Obviously, it's buyer beware, but that just gives you a little bit of an idea of who to go to and sort of what to look for. You could get a swarm off somebody else, or an association, or other beekeepers may have swarms that they collected that they don't want. That's great. It saves you a couple of £100. There are some unknowns. You don't know its disease status. You don't know what its queen's like. You don't know the temperament, and all those are unknowns. You can take that lottery. It's free. If it doesn't work out, then you haven't lost as much, but it does come with risks as well as benefits. Sometimes beekeepers will have full colonies and they're downsizing, and they'll sell you a full colony. The price of that will probably be a bit more. That's quite a big thing to get into in your first season. Often you'll pick up a nuke in sort of June, July time, and swarming risk in your first season isn't really too much of a worry. If you pick up a full colony, and sometimes you pick it up earlier in the year, then that colony is going to get big while you're learning. You just want to be sure that you're ready to take that on, because that might be something that you'd be ready for in your second year with a bit of experience, but might be a bit sort of woo in your first year. Up in this area, the people I'd suggest talking to are Travelling Bee Company, who's a beekeeper based in Gateshead, Northumberland Honey, who are based in Haltwhistle. Our own association and members have people who are selling bees, and we've got a Facebook page, a WhatsApp page. So we will have people there who are selling in the season. There's a national broker, a guy called Patrick Laslett, who you will find via the internet. Sorry, I don't have his address on me. Who is a national broker, and he takes a cut and he ties up buyers and sellers. It's as simple as that. He doesn't really do anything apart from just runs that brokerage. Sometimes the Beecraft magazine has adverts in the back of it, and that is a useful thing. Those are the main routes. There will be others. Again, network, contact your local association, and they will probably put you in touch with others and people who are closer to you if you're not in our area. All right, just let me... some useful organisations you might want to talk to. British Beekeepers Association we talked about. National Bee Unit. If you're a beekeeper, please, please, please register yourself on the bee-based website with the National Bee Unit. They look after bees in the same way that DEFRA does other animals. They've got inspectors who will come around and support you. And if you've got disease issues, they are duty bound to come out and check your hives if you think you've got one of the serious pests or diseases. Very good, and you can register with them for free, and they'll send you out local alerts and things like that. And of course, your local association, ours, for example, Newcastle up there. These are suppliers that I would suggest that you maybe want to look at. There are others, but these are the ones that I use most. I'll leave this up on what I will do with this video, by the way. Some of this material will be in the Getting Started document I've emailed you. Hopefully we'll get this up on our YouTube channel as a session sort of fairly shortly. Thorn is the biggest, and their sale kicks off on the 29th. They've got everything. Paynes is another large one. I haven't used them as much, but they're really good. National Bee Supplies, like them. Their stuff is very high quality, a little bit higher on price, but really good stuff. Cadden Hives is a smaller Scottish place on the borders. Really like their stuff. I've got quite a bit of theirs. Modern Beekeeping, they sell a lot of Danish company called Swinety polystyrene hives, like them. Maysmore Apiaries, I use them especially for wax and things like that. Seawind Jones, which is a Welsh company, who have a lovely little farmhouse on the Welsh borders. They've got some very keenly priced kit. Bee Equipment Limited are another good one. They're another fairly big supplier. You can get stuff off eBay and things like that. Just watch the prices on eBay, because you can easily pay way more than you would pay for getting it sort of from one of the suppliers. Although you might sometimes find some of the suppliers above. Used equipment. Yes, you can get beekeepers who are giving up or downsizing who want to sell equipment. However, just be careful. Why are they selling their kit? Did all their bees die out? Did all their bees die out because they died out of disease? Some diseases in hives can last for 40 or 50 years, the spores of the disease. Never ever use combs from another person's hive unless you've just got those as part of a nuke. The kit all needs to be treated as potentially contaminated, and kind of what we do is we scorch woodwork with blow lamps and scrub stuff with washing soda. Obviously don't use a blow lamp on polystyrene kit, otherwise that ends really badly. But just watch out for stuff that you're buying secondhand. It can be a good deal, but just be very aware of the disease risk it carries. These are some good websites where there's a lot of good information. Dave Cushman, who isn't alive anymore, but his website's been taken over by a very experienced beekeeper called Roger Patterson, is encyclopedic. If there's anything you ever want to know about beekeeping, it'll be on the Dave Cushman site. Beekeeping Forum is as it suggests, beekeeping forum. It can be a little bit rough and ready, but if you've got questions, it's not a bad place to ask them. The Norfolk Honey Company I mentioned earlier is run by this guy called Stuart Spinks, who's an ex-bee inspector. He's got on it, it's linked to a YouTube channel, and there's so much information, video kind of clips there. It's really good quality. And British and Irish beekeepers and our own Facebook page is kind of are other places you can go. Lots of Facebook pages and other groups. Those are just a few. Books, we talked a little bit about books. So there's the Haynes Beekeeping Manual, which I'd sort of say maybe look at that one first. Ted Hooper Guide to the Bees and Honey, Practical Beekeeping. There is a book that the BBKA did, which is very good as well. BBKA Guide to Beekeeping just hasn't got the leverage that the Haynes manual's got. Magazines, there's BBKA News, who I work for, who you get that monthly as soon as you're a full member of an association. And there's another magazine that's a subscription called Beecraft. Both great magazines. Okay, so setting up an apiary. I know we had a specific question about this earlier, so let's just talk about that. Your first choice, where's the apiary going to be? Is it going to be in your garden? If it is, great. How big's your garden? Small urban gardens, you may get away with that. Have you got children? Have you got neighbours? Have you got pets? Just consider the kind of risk of nuisance there. What I tend to find is a lot of beekeepers with one hive will start off close to home in their garden, but may over time think that that's a little bit challenging and might look for another space to keep them. If you are going to keep them in your garden, just maybe not right by the wall next to the bus stop, maybe not where the flight path, where the bees fly straight out of the hive, is straight into where you like to sit in the evening with a glass of wine. Just use your common sense on that. An out apiary is what we call is a space separate to our homes where we can keep bees that may have less potential for nuisance. And often beekeepers, as they expand, trend away from home towards another space. If you've got a nice big garden, great. It's just one of those things you're going to have to take step by step. There's no hard and fast yeses or nos, but just be cautious. Beehives, when you see a big beehive midsummer, it's like watching cars on a motorway coming in and out. It's busy. And that may or may not be feasible where you are. Try to keep your hive entrances not facing roads, paths, nearby housing. Again, it's this traffic in and out is significant. You can sometimes put a 6-foot fence, a mesh fence or something like that in front of the hive. So when the bees come out of the hive, they fly up. And once they're above head height, until they found forage, they tend not to bother you. So they don't get, I mean, it's not a problem for me because they never get caught in my hair. But for other people, it's bees kind of, you stand in front of the hive, bee gets caught in your hair, it panics, it stings you, it alerts other bees with its alarm pheromone, and things can go a bit badly from there. When you are looking at sites, hives are heavy when you move in them, so having decent road access to not too far away is a good idea. You won't easily know this, but if you've got too many beekeepers in one area, then the forage can get, and some cities like London, there are suggestions that the density of honeybees is now so great that actually it's causing issues with both disease and the amount of available forage for the bees. So it's not an easy one, you'll know, but if you know you've got 10 beekeepers down your street, unlikely but possible, you might want to think about somewhere else. Vandalism and theft of beehives, because there is 500 quid sitting in a box there. Theft is an issue. So just be aware of where you're putting them and how safe and secure it is. Vandalism, you do get bored kids, especially in the summer, who like to kind of poke a stick in the front of them, throw bricks at them, try and push them over as a dare with their mates and things like that. So again, if they're kind of somewhere where they're a little bit hidden away, all the better. Setting up an apiary. So the ideal site, which you will never find, but is an ideal, will have level ground. It will be semi-shade, semi-sun, so it won't get full sun all day, but we'll get some sun, especially in the morning. Ideally, it faces south, maybe a bit of shade at midday. Bees need a lot of water, so it would have a water source nearby, or you might want to put some water in a trough nearby. Not open water, it needs to have something that the bees can actually land on, because otherwise they'll drown. Avoid areas that, especially at the moment, I've seen a lot of people having to move their hives in a hurry because there's flooding on the fields they've got them in. Avoid flood areas, frost pockets. Make sure that you've got space to work all around the hive. So you never work a hive from in front, you always work from the side or behind. So make sure there is space to the side and behind. If you have a straight line of hives, the bees can do what they call drift, so they can move from one hive to another, especially downwind. So if the hives aren't in too straight a line, that's ideal. And this idea of a windbreaker fence to kind of stop too much of the elements getting to the hive, but also to raise their flying height when they come out of the hive. So these are just a couple of examples of apiary sites. If you've got them in a field and there's livestock in the field, do put some fencing up. Animals tend to love to use the hives as a scratching post, and they can knock them over in the process. So livestock fencing, if there's livestock, is kind of is worth doing. So all sorts of places. There is no place you can't keep a beehive. There are just some that are probably better than others. Equipment, safety equipment. So your PPE, a bee suit, some gloves. These people are all wearing leather gloves. I wouldn't recommend them. I would recommend long cuff, nitrile, medical gloves, which aren't the easiest thing to get hold of at the moment. Gauntlets, not so great, which are what those long gloves are called. If you have got PPE, it doesn't work if you don't zip it up. And there will be a time you flip the hood off to go and do something, you come back to your apiary, you'll forget to zip it up, and then suddenly you find you've got bees on the wrong side of the veil. That hurts, and it's your own fault. So zip yourself up. If you are going to do any training or anything, just consider a risk assessment. And obviously the biggest risk is anaphylaxis. You should be aware of that as a risk, and you should have thought through what would happen if that happened in my apiary, because it can be life-threatening. I do know a beekeeper who really should have given up some years ago, had an EpiPen and didn't give up, and their EpiPen was in their car, and unfortunately they never made it back to their car. So it is a real risk, be aware of it. Stings, we've talked a little bit about. What triggers stings is you most of the time. So if you've had some alcohol, they don't like leather, perfumes, moving too fast, vibrations, bad weather, a thunderstorm they'll spot. I'll try and come around to questions in a minute. So 14 by 12 hive does not, yes, the supers can be the same as a national, but the brood frames are a different size. Yes, what 3 words is a very good idea to have on your phone if you are out and out apiary. So medical providers, ambulances can find you immediately or much quicker, because believe me, some apiary can be pretty remote, and that can be a scary place to try and direct an ambulance to, especially if you're not familiar with it. Alarm pheromones, if you get one sting, beware, because bees will be attracted to that sting site, and that can lead to more and more bees kind of stinging. If you get stung, scrape it out, smoke where the sting was, walk away for a minute if you can. The things you can do to avoid stinging: wear your PPE, have a smoker, sometimes a water spray. If your smoker's not working, one of those little garden misters for pot plants, that can be sometimes an effective just to keep control of the bees. You just want to keep control of the bees and manage them. Move slowly, stand to the side or behind the colony. Let me just come back onto. So to sort of recap, join a local association. That's some details of ours and when we meet. Start when you're ready. Don't feel pressured to start because you really want to get going this season. Start when you feel ready. Getting a nuke in May and June is the most common starting point. Get your bees from as reputable source you can. You could start with a swarm, but we've talked about the negatives and positives of that. If you can get gentle bees, bees come in all flavors just like humans do. You can get some lovely gentle bees and you open the hive and they look up at you and they go morning and carry on with what they're doing. You can get other colonies, you lift the lid off and you have instantly got a face full of bees. In your first season, you probably want the first, not the second of those types. Make sure you've got enough equipment. If you can find a mentor who will be someone who will support you and be there when you have issues and need someone to talk to, whether that's as an individual level or an association level, find it. Get yourself some good books. BBKA membership, we've talked about. Those are some of the benefits. Won't go into that in more details. Beekeeping is confidence and knowledge that you will gain over time. BBKA has a great education structure which will run you through from a course you can take after a year of beekeeping called the Basic, which your local association will be more than pleased to help you move towards. Then it moves through a whole load of other qualifications you can get. This is a completely confusing graphic, but it will run you through some practical exams and some written exams that you can do to find where you'll feel comfortable with as you move on in your skills in beekeeping. There will always be another qualification ready for you to move on a step. That's pretty much the end. I will stop screen sharing in a second and take any questions that I haven't answered so far. Sorry, it's a whistle-stop tour through this, but I hope I've covered some of the basics. Let me come back on some questions we've been asked and see if I've missed anything. So I've mentioned flow hives. Siting your hives, I hope I've covered in some detail. Obviously, everyone would love the perfect site. The perfect site doesn't exist. We've talked about a little bit about 14-12s. The advantage of a 14 by 12 hive is it gives a big brood area. The disadvantage is if you try and lift that box, it will weigh up to 60 pounds. And depending on how strong you are, a normal brood box can weigh 40 pounds, a 14 by 12 can weigh 60 or more pounds. That's quite a lot to lift. It's your call, but they're big boxes. What 3 words? An EpiPen. EpiPens, no, they're only available on prescription. You would have to convince a medical professional that you needed one. They're not issued prophylactically. You would need to have a conversation with your medical professional about that. It's an issue that a normal sting reaction should be minor redness, swelling and itching for 48 hours. If you get something more than that, talk to a professional about it. There are things you can go through. I've had 2 apiary managers working with me over the last 5 years, both of whom have had to give up beekeeping because their sting reaction was getting out of control, and they were having sort of they could have gone through a process called immunotherapy, but that takes a long time and is quite involved. How do we transport hives and bees? Good question. Carefully. You need to, ideally, if you're transporting them in your own car, then you need to be very careful of 2 things. A, the bees don't overheat and die, which means that often you need to give them good ventilation, but in giving them good ventilation, you need to make sure that the box is secure and bees can't get in and out, because that's not something you want in the back of your car. You also want to strap that hive up really securely. So it's got at least 2 hive straps around it, not crossed over on the cross, but parallel, so the hive can't twist. You want to put gaffer tape around every seam of the bees, between every box of the bees. Ideally work with a buddy who can help you with the lifting. When you put it in the car, what I use is I make sure that the frames are facing back to front, so that the cornering is less of a problem, but the acceleration, so the bees don't get crushed. And also block the entrance is the most important thing. The bees need to be able to breathe, so the open mesh floor should help with that. But if you're transporting them over a distance, you can buy special traveling screens that sit on top instead of the crown board, and those will let them breathe. Again, it needs to be all very secure and bee proof. And if you're transporting long distances over an hour, you need to stop and water spray the bees because they can overheat and die. Do it carefully. Again, there are some specialist things you can look at for knowing how exactly to do that. If you can do it with somebody more experienced first time, then even better. Let's see if we've got anything else. That's it for the questions I've had. If you've got any more questions, very happy to answer them. Unmute yourself and ask me now. that's the end of this formal bit, but I'll stick around for as many questions as you've got. If you have any questions that you think of afterwards, just ping us on the website address. I'll be more than happy to answer them. This is only meant as a taster. A normal course, beginner's course, would last probably, you're talking about 20 hours and stuff like that, and there will be practical sessions on top of that. So 15 to 20 hours would be a normal starter's course. So there's quite a lot to learn in there. But I hope that's been a little bit of a useful starter. Neil, yes, you had a question.
Hi, Ian. Yeah, just to say a massive thank you for taking the time out to put this together and present it on your time off over Christmas. I know I've been really busy, but I have had time over the last 12, 18 months to dip in and out of the WhatsApp group, and also go through Stuart Spinks's Norfolk videos and some of the ones on the Newcastle beekeepers. I'm feeling about ready to start myself, so I can only say to anyone who's thinking about it, it's preparation, fail to prepare and prepare to fail. So I think for me the most difficult part was understanding the purchasing of the hive. But like I say, all the support I've had from everyone on the site, I'm really grateful. I just want to say thank you.
You're more than welcome. I mean, as I say, when I went through the same process as you're going through, a bit over 10 years ago now, it was a bit of a struggle, and I made mistakes that I needn't have made because there wasn't quite the infrastructure in our area there to give the support. What I like to do is to stop people reinventing the wheel, to stop people make what can be expensive mistakes. There will always be the widest sort of range of opinions in beekeeping you will ever get. You will never get two beekeepers to agree on almost anything, which makes it hard when you're starting up. So all I'm going to try and give is just some general advice. Within that, you're going to have to kind of make some choices, but at least you can make informed choices and hopefully kind of have a fun and successful kind of time in beekeeping, while at the same time looking after the welfare of the bees, which is at the end of the day always the most paramount sort of aspect of what we do. So thank you very, very much for coming along. Run pretty much the time. As I say, if you haven't got any more questions, I'm here for 5-10 minutes or however long you need, but ping us an email if you would like. And if you're feeling deeply generous, and a couple of people have, if you fancy supporting our association by the Buy Me a Coffee link, then that would be lovely. Thank you ever so much. Happy to take any questions. If not, see you another time. If you're local to us in Newcastle, might see you quite soon. If you're from further afield, have a great beekeeping time. And I really hope this next 12 months turns out a better year than the last year, which has been challenging for all of us. Okay.
I think Alison's got a question.
Oh, sorry, Alison. Do you want to unmute yourself? I can't. Alison, sorry. Oh yeah, Alison, I think I've got you unmuted now.
I was just wondering, in a local association, whether they had opportunities for people who could volunteer and just join and learn a bit more through experience in that way.
Most associations will have an association apiary, which they will open varying times of the month. And the whole aim of those is to take people who've done a beginner's course. Some associations will offer a beginner's course themselves. Other associations, ours doesn't, because up until recently there were two really good associations in, two really good training courses in our area. We would have been sort of competing in a market that was full. So,
and that's the one that you talked about, isn't it? The one in March.
Kirkley Hall in March is the local one to here. As I say, there's a little bit of an issue this year in that they will be trying to catch up on the people who took their course last year but then got bumped off during COVID. So how they're going to manage the numbers there, I'm not sure.
The best way is probably to email the lady's name.
Precisely, yeah, or get in touch with us. The kind of guy who runs it, and his wife and the others, some of them come from our association, but the more senior people out there are from Hexham Association. But it's a great course. Ian Robinson, who's the main course leader out there, is a lovely beekeeper, really experienced chap. I've got a huge amount of time for him. He will do a very good course. Where associations tend to pick up is most associations, I say, will have their own training apiary. The practical experience you will get on any training course will be with a largish off group of other people, which they'll manage to the best they will. But having a more practical experience is never wasted. So if you can get along to your local association to sort of build up on that base experience you've got, terrific. That's going to be a real benefit to you.
So this Newcastle Association, you put down that usually the second Tuesday of the month at 7 o'clock.
That's our evening sessions. The evening sessions we do then. What we had to suspend all our face-to-face apiary practical sessions last year because of COVID. What we did is we took them online, did little short recordings of those and put them on our Newcastle beekeepers, Newcastle District Beekeepers YouTube channel. What we're going to be able to do this year, I'm afraid, is still uncertain. I would love to start the face-to-face practical ones again. I'm not, in honesty, sure in the springtime whether that's going to be realistic or not. Even outdoors, it will be challenging. So we will certainly look at it, but we will take national guidance and the safety of everyone involved as a priority, which isn't ideal. It is a practical craft, and to not be able, I think the Kirkley Hall course, I know they're planning to do the offline, the theory by Zoom. I'm not sure they've resolved how they're going to do the practical side of it either. I'm sure they have a plan, but I don't know what that plan is. And they may not know what that plan is themselves at this moment in time. Just living a waiting game to see just what we can do. I have trained the group through lockdown this year. And there was a church group who I was in the middle of training when lockdown kicked in. We had to suspend everything for a couple of months during the first phase. But then I took some bees to their site, and with sort of pretty strict social distancing, when the rule of 6 came in, we were able to invite sort of small groups because we left the bees there for a whole season. And whenever I was checking the bees, a couple of people would come along, and we did it as realistically and as safely as we could. There may be options that as an association we can offer like that, whether we can do that at our association. The one thing with our association apiary is, for good reasons, we fenced it to minimize any nuisance. However, that restricts the space and how far you can get away from other people, which we never even thought in a million years at the time. Now, with the restrictions we've got, makes things easy to, I don't know,
Yeah.
how we crack that issue. I think it's going to be the autumn before realistically we can hold face-to-face meetings again. We've tried to maximize the benefits. We've obviously got Zoom, and we're proficient with that now. We've invited some really, in my view, because I've found them, some really good speakers for the first 6 months of the year. And we've tried to maximize the benefits that some speakers, we just couldn't afford to get them to transport them and to do their accommodation to this area. So we've never kind of had them up. But they're people I would love to listen to talking about beekeeping. And hey, now we can do it. So we're trying to fill in gaps the best way we can. One of our thoughts this year is, if we can't do practical beekeeping sessions, we do have some very experienced beekeepers, both in the association and as kind of friends and locals to us. I would like to go out and do the sort of training sessions that we did in our own apiary last year at some of their apiaries, if they were willing to, and then put those up on our Facebook and YouTube page as examples of best practice. It still isn't as good as doing it for real, but you know what, it's it's closer than kind of trying to read it out of a book. So that's the kind of plans, but we'll see. Is that something?
And I just put one other question up online, which was about siting hives and bees for people who perhaps didn't have the outdoor space. I'm thinking, I live in Harrogate at the moment,
Yep.
but I'm also living in Newcastle. We're moving there. But I tried to get an allotment and tried to do things, and it's really hard to do that, especially with everybody wanting everything. And I had met somebody who's got a beehive on their allotment already. I met somebody who had one on a local to where I'm living at the moment. I didn't know whether there was anything that went on in cities to provide spaces, that you could almost rent a space in that people wanted to use.
It's a really good question. Finding apiary spaces is always a challenge. Allotments vary. In Newcastle, they're fairly supportive. Although the way it works in Newcastle is that the council is very kind of arm's length about running associations. The council used to directly have some influence. Now they've how should we put it politely? Now they've dumped that responsibility to a private group called Urban Green.
Yes, I've contacted them.
Now, allotment sites in the city vary in terms of there's not quite the demand there was a few years ago, but there's still quite high demand. So you can end up on quite a long waiting list depending on the area.
Mm.
The way that Urban Green and Newcastle do it is that the individual allotment associations actually have yay or nay on what happens on their sites within the bounds of some guidance. They are okay with having bees on site, but we actually, and I can send it to you, we've got a guidance document that Newcastle Council asked us to help them with a few years ago that gives some basic parameters of your responsibilities as a beekeeper to avoid nuisance to others, which goes on a bit, but basically it'll give you the overview of it. Okay. So that's possible. Other spaces, occasionally as an association, we get approached by people saying, hey, I've got a garden, I've got a big open space. I don't want to keep bees, but I'd love bees on my land, and we'll pass that information on.
Okay.
It's very erratic when that happens, and obviously last year it pretty much dried up altogether because nobody wanted anybody coming anywhere near them. The other way in honesty to do it is look at where you're living, go on Google Earth and look for some green spaces near you, the golf course, the local wildlife sanctuary, the sort of, and get in touch with them. Yep, sorry, I'm just going to make a note that somebody wants that document as well. If anybody else wants that document, just ping us a message. It's a useful one to kind of have. That's the way that you can practically go about it. You can also, there is on the BBKA's website, there's a feature called B&B, which tries to link up landowners with beekeepers to match up sort of dating, if you want, for hive spaces. Just ask around your friends, your acquaintances, businesses. Some businesses, I know people in Newcastle who've got bees on the Virgin site, the Sage site, and places like that. I've got bees on the Tyne Tunnel site. Some corporates really like the green publicity they get of, we've got this good environmental, so they can be worth approaching. You just got to get a bit brave and go out there and kind of have a chat with people. They may say no. They may want a conversation with you. Most of them will want some proof of some experience would be great. The BBKA basic assessment, which you can't take until you've had bees for a year, so it's a bit of a catch-22. They like to see some evidence of certainly they want to see, normally want to see your indemnity insurance. Sometimes they want to see a risk assessment, which again, we can help you with. Rooftops, I've kept them on top of shopping centre rooftops, museum rooftops. The university has some on their rooftops in Newcastle. Rooftop sites aren't always perfect, but they can work. So yeah, you just got to use your imagination, really. If it is a rooftop site that you go for, And people show you that, so, oh yeah, it's fine. However, you have to go up that 20-foot access ladder to do it. No, walk away, walk away. You do not want to be carrying a 40-pound box full of 50,000 bees up an access ladder. You really just don't want to do that. It's not worth it. But some places have lovely roofs that are possibilities. So yeah, if
Thank you. There's a lot of food for thought. Yeah, I think getting onto one of these training courses would be the best thing. And obviously, as you said, it's quite tricky even for this next year. But I think it's just starting to learn lots of things and put it all together. It's been really, really helpful.
No worries. If we find that Kirkley Hall books up massively, and like last year that there's oversubscription, and we will look to do something ourselves. But we're slightly holding back on that because what we don't want to do is kind of is the Kirkley Hall course has had to struggle over a few years with changes of management at Northumberland College. We don't want to impact on them. But if there's a gap that needs to be filled, rest assured we will do whatever we can to try and fill it, and we could do it along the lines we've done today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been really good, and Happy New Year when it comes.
Happy New Year to you all. I hope everyone had a good Christmas. Thanks ever so much for coming. If there's any more questions, great. If not, I'll call it a day there, and I'll forward that document to the couple of people who've asked.
Okay, thank you so much.
Take care. Bye, folks.
Take care, everyone.
Thanks, Ian. Bye.
Bye-bye.